Hi folks, it's Dave Herndon here with Skuid. Today we're going to be talking about connecting to SQL databases with Skuid and step you through the process of how you get data inside of your applications that you're building with Skuid from various SQL data sources, alongside of course any data you might have from Salesforce, any of our other connectors. They all work pretty much the same way once you get the data in. So let's jump in and take a look. I've got a page over here that we're going to come back to. This is what we'll build out, just kind of test what we build here as far as a data connection. And I'll come back to this here in just a minute. But what you'll notice across the top of Skuid's menu system here is where we were is in the new page composer. Some various different options here, but you're going to want to focus on the configure option. So when you go to the configure menu and you click on data sources, you're going to see a list of all the specific connectors that you have created to go out and connect to third-party database systems or REST APIs or things like Microsoft SharePoint. I've even done demos of things like ServiceNow, etc. So lots of options here, but today we're going to talk about creating a new data source specific to a SQL server. And I'll tell you here what we support. Once I load this up here, you'll see a list of all the different data sources we support. And DynamoDB certainly is one of them, not really a SQL database, but we have Amazon Redshift, which is actually. And we've got Microsoft SQL Server, we've got Oracle, we've got MySQL, and in theory at least, MariaDB, if you're using that. And we also have PostgreSQL. So I'll just pick Postgres real quick. We'll call it test here, and I'm going to cancel out of this in just a second after I illustrate what you need to put in and show you one that I've already got working. But when you go configure this new data source, you want to specify an endpoint. Now think of it this way. These are specific connectors. At least the four relational database connectors are wire level protocols. So we're doing JDBC. You'll need to be able to resolve to the specific server that is in your network or potentially out in the cloud. So it might be an Amazon type database server or Microsoft Azure, or it may be one that you have on premise. You'll also need to specify and be able to resolve the port name. So 5432 is kind of the common port name for a Postgres database. So you'll put a colon after the connection and then put the port number specifically here. And in this case, we've got one called DVD rental, and then we've got a username we'll need to plug in on your database server. So you'll need to check and find out from your DBA what that is, and then of course a password. Now a couple other points. If this server is actually behind your firewall on your network, it's possible to get to it. But your security team is going to have to prove that. And you're going to have to go in and open up some sort of reverse proxy or firewall ports to allow traffic to come from the Skuid servers. Now we give you the list of IP addresses right here that make up our server infrastructure for our Skuid platform site. Salesforce, you would check with your Salesforce documentation to show you what whitelist ports that you'll need to IP addresses and ports you need to open. But from Amazon, this is what we give you right here when you create the database connection, and you'll have to leverage it that way. In version 12, we actually have a new thing, we'll talk about that later, called Private Data Service, that actually keeps all your data connections local within your network for the actual data sources. So exciting stuff coming up soon. We'll have a Skuid dive or a Skuid short like this on that pretty soon. So I'm going to cancel this one real quick and just jump back to one that's been completed here. I've got one out of my test instance called AWS RDS Postgres. That's what I named it. There's my server out in Amazon. And it's a database called DVD rental, and my username and password, secret stuff there. So once you set this up, you'll get to the next step in that wizard I was just showing you. You'll hit the test connection button. It'll come back and say, yep, I can connect. Username is password right. I can resolve to the server address. In this case, again, out on Amazon. And we're all good to go there. But one more step. You're going to want to go in and import what we call Datasource Objects, because we kind of keep it generic. But what this means is import your tables. Not all your data, but the metadata about your tables, the relationships, the primary keys, the foreign keys, all the things that we need in Skuid to be able to create intelligent relationships between the objects or the SQL tables in your database. So you can click on this. I've only got 4 imported in this database. There are others out there. For instance, if I want to go ahead and pull in the film actor table, I can import that object, and Skuid will just go out and read the database metadata, pull it in, and it now will be available for you to manipulate even further. So let me just show you an example of what you can do in Skuid from a security standpoint, above and beyond what your DBA has already set up for security and things like that. So if I go into the film data source object here, we're going to go into the details of it. I can see all the metadata, the film table, what the columns are in the table, whether it's required or not based on the database definition, and all sorts of good information there. We can also set application level access control on this table, and in fact we can do it at the field level if you choose to do it. So if I want to, in access control, I can come in here and say all public users or any standard users or any administrators, what permissions do they have? And these are kind of standard definitions for Skuid for authenticated users. I'm going to click on standard, and I can go in simply and say at the table level, users in that particular profile can create, update, and delete records in this table, and I can actually even go down to the individual field level and create my own custom. So what that means is Skuid will enforce these permissions whether or not you've enforced them at the database level with your SQL Server permissions that you normally set up on SQL Server or Postgres or etc. We also have what are called condition permissions, and we also have, if I go back to this, kind of a neat feature to be able to go into film category, let's say, and say I only want to offer when the user connects using this connection, AWS, RDS, Postgres, certain rows in the database. So essentially what you can do is you can put a where clause on any query that comes from an app that your users build through that data source, and that condition will always live with that connection. So if you by default wanted to say, you know what, we don't even acknowledge that closed status items are even allowed in any applications, we can just filter those out with essentially what amounts to a where clause put at the driver level. So that's kind of a nice feature to be able to control what your users see. So once you have all this set up, the metadata is imported. It's just like any other Skuid application. You come in and you create a new model, and we'll call this one Films. I'm going to choose what type of data source do I want to look at here. In this case, I'm going to pick that one Postgres that I just showed you, AWS RDS Postgres. Don't have to select that one again. I actually have another one out there. And then we're going to type in the entity name or just drop down the list. And again, that metadata has already been imported from Skuid. We should see that it pops up and shows us all the tables, including the one I just added when I imported that film category. I'll click Film. We do support aggregate queries with Skuid. Right now we'll keep it basic, but we can do essentially group by with average and sums and counts in the queries that are sent back to the server. Great for dashboards and things like that where you want the server to do the work for you. Then I'll just go pick off the fields that I want. The film ID perhaps, the length of it, the rating. These are all the columns from the metadata. Release year, rental rate, and then of course the title of the film. And then we can put conditions on. And essentially this is you putting a where clause on what gets generated for the SQL that goes back to your Postgres server in this particular situation. And I won't add one right now, but certainly you can add any combination of likes and is in or contains or all sorts of things you can put just like you can in SQL if you were writing the code yourself. Okay. So lastly, I'm just going to take this, double click on Films, tell it to create a default table component. It'll put the columns in for me in Skuid. I'm going to save that page. And then I'm going to click the preview button. And out of the box you'll see, not the prettiest app in the world, but it's a default table component with all the films in the database that we just connected to via Amazon in Postgres. So allows us to do, rewrite, updates, deletes, all these types of things that we expect. Again, depending on performance or permissions that are set, on the actual tables, we're allowed to make changes. And that's pretty much it. It's that easy to add SQL to your database applications, whether you're mixing this table with data from Salesforce on the same page or any other data source. Again, once like in Skuid, once you get it into the model, it's up to you what you build and what you show the user and how they interact with it. So I hope this was useful, and we'll see you again on another Skuid Short soon.